Thank you, Abby. Thank you, everybody, for being here on a Friday night. It does show that you care enough about this topic to be here on a Friday night after a long week of work. I care about it a lot myself for a very good reason. I do this as a job, and I started thinking about this topic very early on. In fact, I was perhaps an odd child. At age of 14, all my friends were talking about music and football, and I spent all of my time with my computer in my room. And you will think, well, as a teenager with a computer, that is not strange. Except it was 1982, and nobody else in my town in Italy had a computer. I was the only one. And I loved it. And it was my favorite pastime to program this computer, which could do very little, of course. There was no video game in it. But at school, I was meant to study the classics. That was my school, so Latin and Greek. And that winter, I needed some help with my Greek grammar, and my mother arranged for some tuition. And the tutor was a priest from the next door convent next to my house, Don Antonio. And he was a humanist. He loved the classics and everything about it. And one day he asked me, why didn't you finish your translation yesterday? And I said, well, I finished, I was working with my computer instead. I was changing its fonts into Greek fonts, by the way. And he wasn't pleased, but he said, I heard about such electronic brains. I saw them on the movies. And I'm 80 now, I would like to see one. So I invited him to my house the next day, and he looked at it with some suspicion. And then he said, turn it on. Which took a while, because it was an old television I was using as a monitor, and 5 minutes later we could read the screen. And he said he liked to quiz people, so he said, ask it, when was Alexander the Great born? And I told him, this is not how it works, you know, you can just ask it, you never know. So I typed in this, it was expecting the complete question. And the answer came, of course, syntax error. So he was very disappointed. And I felt sorry for him, and I told him, if you wait 2 minutes and speak with my mother, I will make it work. So I wrote a little program that was asking a question and had a variable with a date of the answer. And I called him back, and I said, if we ask it now, it will know. So we typed the question again, and this time the answer came out. I was hoping he would be happy, but he said, oh, it doesn't count now. Now you told it. Of course it knows. Everybody would know. And I said, well, that's how computers work. You must tell it. So I remember this much. He turned away from the computer, lost interest, and said, these things will never, ever be better than us. They will never take over us. They will need us all the time. So it got me thinking about what would it take to make a machine intelligent. I asked my uncle, who was a computer engineer, and he gave me some reading on artificial intelligence. I asked my father, who was a doctor, and he told me a few things about the brain, but the truth is nobody knew. And, you know, if the priest doesn't know, and your father doesn't know, and the uncle doesn't know, it's an exciting question. So I started reading as much as I possibly could find. And then I forgot about the story, but I kept on reading about it. And then, a few years ago, my children were playing with the Google app, and they told me, ask this question.
If you just said something, I didn't hear what it was.
They were playing with the Google Now, which is something we all have in the phone. And out of the blue, without thinking, this question came out. When was Alexander the Great born?
Alexander the Great was born in Pella on July 356 BC.
So, you know, he's in the 5th floor, Andre's office. And something has obviously happened in these 35 years. Something has changed. And what we couldn't know back then, I'm looking for my clock now. What we couldn't know back then is that computers would become able to learn from data. That is how Google understood my voice, because it was trained on a lot of data. And not only that, it was able to read Wikipedia, which of course didn't exist. Actually, Google can read millions of books that have been digitized by Google, the company, and all the newspapers, and all the websites, and all the encyclopedias. That is all accessible to it. And it can learn to understand enough about a question. If there is a when in a question, the answer must be a date, and so on. And by the way, in the same way, we can teach computers to recognize a face, to translate from a language into English, and so on. Machine learning and data have been the way in which we made computers become intelligent. That is what I didn't know in 1982 for a long time. And now I do machine learning for a living. That is my job here. And I do this every day. But although I do know how Google can answer my questions, I must say that a lot of other things have happened besides machine intelligence that made all this possible. An important thing that happened is that we started replacing our previous communication infrastructures. We had a telephone system and a radio system and a TV system. We had a telegraph in those days, we had newspapers, we had bookshops. All that is still there, of course, but it is being increasingly integrated into a single unified digital data infrastructure. Now my phone is a phone and a camera, and I can buy things, I can pay things. Slowly by slowly, we are displacing the previous infrastructure for communication with one single new unified one. That is also what made artificial intelligence become possible. And of course, by infrastructure, I mean hardware and software and social institutions that go with them. And so in this moment, we can interact by email or through Facebook. And Facebook can select the most interesting items. Amazon can recommend the most interesting books, and so on and so forth, all because they have access to all this data. And that is part of the beauty of what we are doing, and that is also part of the possible problems that can come from that. So, for example, this new medium isn't at all like the copper cable that was a telegraph or a telephone. This new medium remembers everything. Everything we do is logged and kept and analyzed and traded and used. And then it looks back at us all the time. It has to. It keeps on looking at what we do, trying to guess our intentions, trying to predict our next move. That is the nature of this global data infrastructure we are building and we rely on. So on the one hand, yes, it is giving us the solution to many problems we couldn't solve. We couldn't do speech recognition, or we couldn't do translation without data-driven artificial intelligence. And data-driven means we must collect data. On the other hand, the price we pay is that we are constantly being watched by this system that is learning from us and guessing what we need to do next. And so every time a little kitten video is recommended to you by YouTube or by Facebook, these are tens of thousands of little bits of information about you and your history that are integrated into this decision that happens in a split second. And the same goes for Google queries and so on. We just don't realize it, but we leave this trail of information that is very useful to the system. But some things need to be understood. For example, what is the effect on society when everybody receives most of their news from an automatic recommendation system that is trying to maximize click-through and giving us more of what we want to hear? That's not an engineering question, that's a social science question. And then what happens to society when you are constantly being watched and monitored? Mass surveillance is possible with this technology. It's a matter of deciding if you want it, but it is technically possible. And we know that it is perhaps happening. And then there is the risk of disinformation being used to make decisions that we don't want. For example, just a few weeks ago, Admiral, the insurance company, announced they would be tuning your insurance rate based on your Facebook content, if you accept their offer. Surely when you posted something on Facebook, you never expected this would influence your car insurance rates. And it is possible. It is not a joke. information about your personality can be inferred from your social media posts. We know that. And also from your browsing history. We know that also. And I know of people working on credit scoring predictions. What is the credit score of a person based on their social media behavior? That is possible, it seems. And then there are entire states who announced that they are going to develop a social credit score for their citizens, not just financial, but something quantifying their general worth as citizens. And we don't have, yes, we do have the hardware for this and some of the software, but we don't have the social institutions for this new infrastructure. We don't have the laws and the morals. And so what do you do if you have been denied a loan or maybe access to a school based on your digital trail? Or what if you are denied parole? So in the United States, there are courts that make use of the software to predict the risk of you reoffending. So literally, the algorithm has to compute the decision. And there has been an investigation recently showing that perhaps this software is also used in sentencing decisions, which it was not designed for. So there are a lot of interesting problems, and it's not like we can opt out, because we no longer have a magnetic tape. It was phased out, and a telephone box will be phased out very soon, and after that maybe cash will be phased out soon, and after that maybe the taxi driver will be phased out. We don't have the option to go back. We just have to embrace what we have. We are stuck with it, but at the same time, as we must use it, we are accepting the monitoring and the prediction and all the rest. And perhaps one day there is a lot of research on persuasive technologies too, how to persuade and steer people's behavior based on the interaction that we can't avoid. So these are completely new questions that are not for the engineers to answer. We are, trust me, the worst people to answer these kind of questions. And I think the only thing we can do is to make sure that we all know what is happening and how it is happening and how this technology can help us doing so many beautiful things. We don't want to stop using it, but at the same time, we have to evolve all these new norms. Do we want, for example, to make decisions based on metrics all the time? Do we want to collect data? So who said that decisions based on data are going to be more objective and less biased than decisions based on human judgment, for example? So there is a risk of an uncritical adoption of a data ideology just because it's exciting and new and possible. And I don't have the answer, other than I can tell you that probably my long high school years in the humanities and in the classics have left a sign, and I think Don Antonio would tell you now that whatever we do, we should always keep humans in the center of this. That's all.